e lata simosiaya kaki Xaxli'p los squeaklos go skauko so tsitam skom stlevo tooth homaskium siams mystir equisida khacha tamak. Good morning, everyone. Acknowledging our Coast Salish relatives that we're convening this presser here in Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam shared traditional territories. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Chamberlin, the chair of the First Nations Wild Salmon Alliance, to kick things off here this morning. Galagame.
Good morning, Xaxli'p. Thank you very much for the opening. I want to welcome everyone to this morning's press conference hosted by the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance. I'm the chair, and the intention of today's press conference is to provide information relating to the 102 First Nations across BC that support the transition of fish farms from the ocean. This commitment is found in the DFO minister's letter of mandate, so it is something that the government has turned their minds to. We have to be mindful of the migratory nature of salmon. And so given that reality, the DFO and the Crown must consider all First Nations whose salmon pass these farms. Consultation site-specific in one traditional territory is not well enough. The impacts that are known from fish farms have far-reaching infringement on Aboriginal rights up and down all the major water and river systems of British Columbia. We want to ensure that the minister is clear of the First Nations food security needs, constitutionally protected Aboriginal rights, Supreme Court of Canada law, which gives the minister direction in terms of allocation. We also want to be clear that the impacts that are occurring to wild salmon is one of the, in our opinion, the major contributor to the historical low returns we've seen across British Columbia for the past number of years, the lowest returns in all of history. Given that reality, it is time that every measure is taken to protect wild salmon. Whether it's forestry practices, whether it's fish farms, or what have you, it's time that we get serious before we face extinction across the province. I am very pleased to let everybody know that DFO Minister Joyce Murray's staff has confirmed attending the Union of BC Indian Chiefs Council in early June, where the chiefs in assembly have directed the executive to host a half-day session solely on wild salmon. And so we're very grateful that the minister has made the commitment to attend and hear directly from the chiefs, to hear of the concerns, and more as important, the solutions. Because as we go forward to rebuild wild salmon across British Columbia, it is going to take a very concise, integrated, strategic approach. And this can and must be accomplished with the federal government, the provincial government, and First Nations working together to save this incredibly valuable resource for British Columbia. And so I'm very happy that we were able to report out that 102 First Nations support the Liberal government's transition of fish farms from the ocean, that the Conservative Party and the New Democratic Party also made campaign commitments for the same. So Tyrone, I wanted to keep my comments very brief so we could hear from the chiefs. Thank you very much.
We'll be doing a hybrid release here for you this morning. Next, we'll hear from Darrel Bob, Chief of Xaxli'p, to my right, followed by Don Svanvik, Chief of Namgis, myself on behalf of the Stala Tribal Council, James Hobart, Chief of Spuzzum, and Grand Chief Stewart Phillip will be the final speaker here. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Bob.
Good morning. I just wanted to thank the communities and the nations here for inviting us and allowing us to do what we need to do, the work we have to do on their territories here. You know, and I thank Bob as well for inviting me in to into the fire, so to speak, as I just started recently here. But at the same time, I just wanted to say on behalf of our people that the Xaxli'p do not have an agreement, an arrangement with DFO. We choose not to, and to continue our right as it existed prior to contact. It is without question the adjustments that have been made in the waters of unnatural spirits to the natural beings. The salmon people are suffering today. When the salmon people suffer, our people suffer. In that crossroads of climate change, the fires, what does it all have to do? The warming of the waters. We have to adjust and adapt to the environment that the Creator has given us and do the right thing to look after the land, the finned ones, the four-leggeds, and the two-leggeds. With that said, I pray that this government makes the right choice to do what's right, to protect. If they're truly committed to climate change and all that good stuff I watched in the news in the last 4 years being absent from this table, and that commitment they say they have, now is the time to step forward and show true leadership in protecting the salmon. They're not wild, they're natural. They're part of Mother Earth. When we start putting names to the beings, we've forgotten our responsibility. So with our salmon, the salmon people are hurting, and we have that responsibility to bring back. I understand the politics of it. There are other opportunities to create. There are other ways the government subsidizes or looks after people. We're in a time of change. We're in a crisis. And that crossroads requires true leadership and making the decisions to stop what's impacting our salmon. And I thank the leadership for continuing to fight for that right to exist as a human being. And I pray that our people on the rivers do their best to look after the fish, the salmon people. I too will keep this just short and right to the point. We have to stop this. We have to stop this extinction of the salmon people, this genocide. That same genocide that I went through when I went to residential school, putting us in a pen. That's no different. It's a pattern that must change in this world. Neatly.
Thank you, Chief. Bob, with that, we'll turn over to Homus Canis online. Chief Svanvik, please.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank all the people who organized it. And I really want to thank the people who are listening to us today, because we need to be heard. Salmon need to be heard. Our late chief, we just lost a chief in this past week. And one of the things he said was, we need to speak for the salmon. And that's what we're doing here today. Our salmon are on the verge of extinction. It's hard to believe that there are systems now in our coast that once flourished with salmon that have no salmon. And other systems that are down to, single-digit percentages of what they once were. Salmon, wild salmon, are intrinsic to our way of life over the millennia. The Namgis creation story speaks of the very backbone of our being is our river, and that for the rest of the time we would have salmon. We talk about what we have to do. There are many impacts on wild salmon. The impact that we can affect the quickest and efficiently and effectively is open net pen fish farms. We need to transition these to land. It's that simple. It's time to act. The negative impacts of open net pen farms is well known. We all know this, and it's time for us to act. It's time for government to act. We know that salmon are migratory. They migrate out, they migrate in. This is where the problem starts. There's no particular territory that can say that the salmon aren't going to come through here when they're on the way out to sea, or they're not going to come back through here. When they come back can fulfill their mission of life and come back to spawn and bring life back. So the impacts affect all the salmon. There's no other way to fix it than other to move the farms onto land. That technology they're saying that it can't be done it's being done all over the world. And we talk about the economic, what a boost that would be to the economy to start doing that. Certainly believe that there should be a transition package for people working in the industry. The reality is there needs to be some hard decisions made. There's been many hard decisions in our future. And with planning, the transition can be much smoother. We can have the benefit to our economy, the benefit to the natural resources that we have. We want to make sure that our children, grandchildren, our great grandchildren still have the benefit of this. And I see this not only as a responsibility for the indigenous people, the salmon people, but for all people. This is a responsibility we all share. I remind everybody that in the last federal election, the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP all supported the transition of open net pen fish farms. So this is work that needs to get started. It's going to get done. It needs to get started. The technology of open net pen farms is old. It's archaic. The reality is it needs to change, and we can see it. If we look at salmon being in a bucket that has a bunch of leaks in it, we can't just watch to see how long it takes for that bucket to empty. We have to start patching those holes. And the first step in that is transitioning the open net pen farms to land. I would like to say thank you to the previous fisheries minister who had the courage to make the hard decision, the necessary decision of starting that transition, starting the work that needs to be done. And I implore the new fisheries minister to continue that work so that we can be in a place where we want to be. If we look at all the things that are going on in the world, there's something we can do here and have a positive impact with positive impacts for years to come. So let's get this work done. It's time. It's well past time. We can't just look at the problem and suggest what it might or might not be. We know what the issues are. Let's fix them. And thank you, everybody, for listening to me. Again, thank you for being here. Xaxli'p.
Xaxli'p, Chief Svanvik. Now I'll provide a few remarks. Tyrone McNeil from Seabird Island and President of the Stalo Tribal Council. Sitting here thinking during the previous speakers that when I started fishing just over 50 years ago, the first 25 years, anybody in the fish industry got everything they wanted. First Nations, commercial, recreational, because there's an abundance of salmon. Then about 25 years ago, with the introduction of the first fish farms, we started seeing the numbers going down. And it's to the point now where we as Stalo people, we haven't caught sockeye in the last 3 years. We only catch a handful of Chinook. And we're in a position where I'm compelled to send out a warning to Premier Horgan, to send out a warning to Minister Murray, not to pit a handful of First Nations on the coast against 100+ First Nations that are so reliant on the salmon stocks that go by that marine space. You're directly impacting our rights. You're directly impacting the ability for us to transition our knowledge, our ancient knowledge, onto future generations, which we can only do on the river while we're fishing. And I encourage you, both the Premier and the Minister, to work with those First Nations that are currently partnering with that open net pen fish industry, because they need an economy, they need jobs. Work with them directly, immediately, to transition them inland, to carry on with their economic opportunities, to carry on with the jobs that might be available in such a way that aren't impacting all the salmon that we're so reliant on. And I encourage you, Premier, to take into account that the Declaration of Rights and Indigenous Peoples Act applies to all of us, not the small handful of First Nations that are partnering with the fish industry on the coast. That we all need to be engaged, and we'll share with you our stories of how reliant we are on salmon, on the salmon people. That's important to all of us. And I would charge Premier that the importance of wild salmon here in BC doesn't only lie with us as First Nations, it lies with every British Columbian. It lies with the recreational industry, it lies with the commercial industry. We're all reliant on it. And I encourage you, Premier, to work with us to rebuild those wild salmon stocks. I encourage the Minister to continue taking brave decisions, to stand up, to not cow to the lobby efforts of that marine open net pen fish industry. We know they're a powerful lobby group, but Minister, I encourage you to stand strong. Do not cow down to the Minister. There's too much at stake for all of us, not just a handful of First Nations along the coast. And finally, just a reminder, when then Prime Minister appointed the Cohen Commission to find a way to blame us as First Nations for the rapid decline in salmon, Cohen made the determination that if you, Minister, and if you, Premier Horgan, can prove that open net fish farms that aren't having a negative impact on wild salmon, fine. But if you can't prove that, to transition them off the marine space by 2025. That's 3 years away. So I encourage all of you in the political leadership, provincially and federally, to stand up for wild salmon with us. I encourage British Columbians to stand up for wild salmon with us. I encourage all the industries, recreational, commercial, lodges, everybody stand with us. Let's join hands. Let's come together. Let's put away the fights that we've had amongst each other for the last few decades, fighting over fewer and fewer fish. None of us want to catch that last fish that's caught. Let's work together and rebuild the stocks that in such a way that our rights to access are recognized and implemented. The recreational fishery has the enjoyment of catching salmon in that recreational industry, and then the commercial opportunities as well, because we're all dependent on that food security. So let's all work together. And let's demand that our politicians at the provincial level and federal level stand strong for wild salmon. ACM, Heiltsuk. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief James Hobart from Spuzzum First Nation. Cookby?
Can you hear me okay? Azumin Quenchton, Spuzzum First Nation from the Nklakatmuk territory. Yudekshi Wenwen. I would like to say, first of all, thank you for all the other speakers that have spoke before me, and thank you for the executive for allowing us to present this morning on such an important topic. As I'm listening, I'm vibrating, and I can't. I would have a hard time thinking that anybody listening to the previous speakers, to not be compelled to do something positive around such an important resource. And I've said this before, there's no time to camp out at the finish line. We're almost there. And we've heard no means no so many times, and we cannot express our position strong enough. Our entire Fraser River ecosystem is depending on this. And I'd like to say that we need, the river needs, the tributaries need, all of the different animals, and the land needs these fish, right? And I'm hoping that this race against climate change and the other different issues that are coming against our wild salmon are is quick enough. I hear 2025 and I'm nervous. I think it should be done immediately. That's my thought. But I understand also that there needs to be a transition time for those nations that are compelled to have industry in the open pen salmon farms. I would like to say that I don't think there's a way to make this story transition to a happy story, but we can make it less sad right now, because right now what's happened, if you see the number of fish, like Tyrone was just mentioning, we're not eating the same fish, the same amount. We're not even allowed to. We manage ourselves on the river. If we see the salmon in detriment, we don't take them, and we've been doing that for decades now. And more and more so, we see the detriment of the farm salmon against the wild salmon. And like in many resources, the government compelling our Indigenous brothers and sisters to achieve economic equality by modernizing their practices. The reality is our brothers and sisters are sacrificing their traditional culture, their practices of sustainability, of reciprocity and respect, responsibility, and the reverence of their sacred salmon relatives. Canada is in a way manifesting a form of ethnocentric assimilation that is at odds with the stated objectives of the truth and reconciliation. So we really need to make sure that the message is clear, that we are opposed to any extensions of permitting for the wild salmon or open salmon fish, open pen farm salmon. And actually, I have a hard time saying farm salmon, because if you've ever tasted one of these animals or looked at them, it's not salmon. You could not pass those off to salmon to anybody that's ever eaten one. And so I really think that it's a disservice we're doing to the world to call those things salmon, when if you look at them compared to the actual salmon, I hope by someday that we can rebuild the stocks strong enough that people understand what salmon are, that they don't run to the store and they look at something and they see the cheapest is this I don't know what I look at it and I think, well, that's not salmon. A lot of people are seeing that. But I'll tell you one thing, that there are First Nations that have put their salmon pens on land to prove that it's doable. And so once you cross that threshold of proving that it's possible, then the others need to follow suit. It's not a matter now of whether it can be done or not. It can be done. And so any pressures that you feel, I would like to say that you're going to feel a lot more pressure to do the right thing. And the right thing would be to take us back to a time when the wild salmon had a voice. That's our salmon people, as the past chief said. They have a voice, and right now we're their voice, because you can't put a price on a voice of a wild fish. You can on on a farm salmon. You cannot, there's nothing that can replicate all of the benefits that a wild salmon can bring. And like the past chief said, they're a natural salmon. They're part of the ecosystem. We're part of that same ecosystem. We owe it to them to stick up for them and to be part of their fight. And we will be. And so I just wanted to, put my voice to the argument that you can have boatloads, busloads, plane loads of people going to your office to protest shutting down the farm salmon pens. But you will see that if you want to land on the side that's right, with truth and reconciliation and DRIPA, you need to turn down the chatter and start listening to those people that live on the land that are going to be affected mostly by the effects of what's happening up to date. And like I said, I don't see a happy ending. I didn't see less sadness as we try and work hard to try to rebuild those stocks that are in such peril right now. And for so many reasons, well, you can see right now with the atmospheric rivers, with the climate crisis, with the big bar slide, what else can we put in their path? I think the one thing that we can clearly do is remove the salmon pens out of the migratory paths and out of the oceans, put them on land. So that's all I will say today, because I know that it's going to be a press release and it's going to be short. So Kukstem, and I want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Kukstem.
Kukstem, thank you, Chief Hobart, Spuzzum First Nation. Next, we'll go to Grand Chief Stewart Phillip, then we'll go to Bob Chamberlin to wrap things up. Asiut.
Why? Asiut. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam people, on whose territory we have the privilege of gathering here today. I want to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to Bob Chamberlin for organizing this event and bringing us together. As many of us know, Bob Chamberlin has been relentless in his efforts to advocate and draw the public attention to the toxic impact that salmon farms have had on wild salmon in the province of British Columbia in regard to the issues of sea lice and other very harmful diseases that have really imperiled wild salmon. And I think British Columbians need to understand that the impact of the toxic fish farm industry is felt throughout the entire province, throughout the entire river systems throughout the province, and therefore impacting not only First Nations who have depended for millennia on the harvest of wild salmon, but all British Columbians. There are thousands of British Columbians that enjoy sports fishing and other recreation. And the message we're bringing forward here today is this is an issue that should be of grave concern to all British Columbians. Many of us have had the opportunity to enjoy the bounty and the benefits of wild salmon over the space of our time here, but there's an undeniable right that's being ignored on behalf of our children and grandchildren. They have a birthright to enjoy that same relationship with wild salmon, and that cannot happen if wild salmon go extinct due to the profiteering and greed on behalf of corporations that seek to jeopardize the iconic wild salmon story in the province of British Columbia. Governments have committed very publicly to take the farms out of the waters and put them on the land. It's been in all of the federal campaign commitments, and we need that to happen. The ministry supports that, and we need to urge them to move beyond the rhetoric and and all of that, and get down to the actual actions of moving those farms out of the water. I have many grandchildren and nieces and so on and so forth. That's why I do the work that I do, like we all do. And my niece once wrote, "We're tired of being listened to, but never heard." And I want to thank the press for coming out to help us amplify the voice of the peril of wild salmon in the province of British Columbia. I agree that wild salmon in this province needs a voice. It needs a very strong voice. And as I mentioned earlier, Bob Chamberlin was the vice president of this organization, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and I think he would serve us well, both First Nations and British Columbians at large, as being the official voice of wild salmon in British Columbia. That would give me, as a grandfather, some comfort to know that somebody's watching, and somebody like Bob Chamberlain goes beyond just speaking. He's been very, very active. So with that, once again, I want to thank my colleagues for their very powerful, eloquent remarks in regard to wild salmon. It's a very emotional issue. It always has been for our people. And I want to, again, thank Bob for bringing us together. White, Limlimt.
Limlimt, Grand Chief. With that, we'll turn it back to Bob Chamberlin. Bob?
Thank you for your kind words, Stewart. And just want to acknowledge the Xaxli'p people, the Xaxli'p people, the Stalo, the Okanagan, the Namgis, and we had Marilyn Slett of the Heiltsuk that was going to be a part of this today, but a herring fishery crisis has emerged, so she's unable to be here today. The one thing we often get characterized as being anti-fish farms. We, as First Nations people, are pro-wild salmon, period, unapologetically. It is the basis of our traditions, of our cultures, of our food security. And this is a topic found within the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, something the provincial government has made great steps in the recent past to advance. The federal government has made commitments for this as well. I speak with a high level of knowledge of the impacts of disease, of sea lice, of regulations, of policy, because I've been involved for a very long time. I was part of a team that implemented the UN Declaration and Broughton Fish Farm LOU. I was also a negotiator for the Discovery Islands consultation process on behalf of 3 of the First Nations. I have heard answers from DFO that absolutely offended me as a wild salmon supporter, and something that our people across the province have Aboriginal rights to. 90% of the 203 First Nations rely upon wild salmon. That is what the focus needs to be in terms of protection. That is what the focus needs to be in terms of the renewal or non-renewal of the fish farm licenses. Now, we must recognize the crisis situation that we're in for all of the stressors and impactors. And how do we respond to wildfire impacts? How do we respond to the floods that we've seen? How do we respond to how do we rebuild wild salmon? And at this time, we have a provincial government that has not just spoken of supporting wild salmon, but has stepped up and contributed significant money to a federal responsibility. To me, this spells opportunity where we can all work together for the betterment of salmon. So thank you, Tyrone, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you to all the speakers. That's all we've had in our mind here this morning. Again, reading words of appreciation for the media to come out to help us send our messages out and values that are so important to us to all. But this is all we have on our mind. And maybe just to check with the media, do you need any kind of confirmation of the names or titles of any of the speakers before we make our way for the day? Thank you all for being here.